At their core, human rights lay down in law what we know to be true in our hearts, that we should all have the right to live differently, to think differently, to love differently. They remind us that being different is not a sign of being lesser than someone else, that everyone matters. For over 100 years, Indian residential schools tried to assert a singular idea of what it meant to be worthy of dignity and rights in Canada. They stripped children from their families. They tried to break cultures and erase languages, and they were at the core of Canada's efforts to eliminate Indigenous peoples. Today, we know these schools to be instruments of genocide that took away so much from so many. At the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, we renounce the ideas of white supremacy and colonialism that led to the creation of these schools. And we recognize that there isn't just one idea of what it means to be Canadian. Instead, we rededicate ourselves each and every day to the idea of pluralism, that one vision of the good life is not inherently better than any other. The idea that all people in Canada are entitled to shape our community, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, those who can trace their family lines back hundreds or thousands of years on these lands, or those whose stories as Canadians are just beginning. We aspire to be a community of hope for all, a place where everyone is protected and empowered, where we hold up those in our community who are struggling, where we celebrate that which makes each of us unique, where we are inspired by passion and creativity in all forms. To reach that place, that vision of pluralism, we need to recognize when we have failed to live up to those ideals. That's why the film you're about to watch is so important. Childhood Denied shares the story of Indian residential schools through the voices of survivors, drawn from testimony given to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. But it also shares the way in which systems of child welfare in Canada have failed Indigenous peoples over and over again. The film reminds us that pluralism is not an abstract concept or something we had to fight for in the past, but something we must uphold in our communities every day.
There was a plane that landed by the shore, and the governments were picking up kids. I looked back at my parents. I said, I don't want to go. I started crying, but I was grabbed by my arm and forced into the plane.
That day, decades ago, Simon Hogaluk was sent to a residential school, far from his home, his family, and his culture.
When they closed the door, I was looking out the window. I could see my parents together. I want to go home. I want to be with my parents. But there is no way I could get back out.
For more than 100 years, over 150,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children are taken from their homes by the Canadian government and placed in boarding schools. The plan is to apprehend, relocate, and aggressively assimilate Aboriginal children. Through this, it was believed they would become productive members of society. The schools are part of a legacy of forced assimilation that stretches into the 21st century and includes the 60s scoop and the child welfare system. From the beginning, the government assigns the running of the residential schools to several churches.
They took away my name. They gave me a number. My number is number 54.
The schools are run with little accountability. The quality of education is poor, and conditions often abysmal. It's estimated that thousands of children died, many from disease and malnutrition. There is abuse of all kinds.
You're told you're a second-class citizen and maybe a third-class citizen. Your language is no good. Your culture is the culture of the devil. And you know you're not perfect, but you got to act like you're perfect. Because if you didn't, you got the physical abuse.
I have a burn on my arm because I wouldn't iron the way the nun had told me to iron. She burned me. This was to teach me a lesson. And when my arm got infected, she said, "That's the devil in you."
And it wasn't just one person, it was a different number of people that worked there that sexually abused younger boys. And when I wouldn't cooperate, they'd strip me naked and put me in a dark dungeon until I would. So that followed me for 48 years.
Yet even in the midst of this darkness, there are moments of light.
One day, one of the brothers came over and asked me what size moccasins do I wear. "I got some skates for you, Jules. I want you to learn how to skate." So he showed me how to put them on, how to skate around. By the time Christmas holidays were gone, Bobby Orr was born. I know how to skate in circles. Sometimes it was kind of fun, but 90% of the time it was sad.
In the mid-'80s, many survivors of residential schools break the silence and start speaking out. Determined to hold the government and the churches accountable, they start suing for damages. In 2006, the federal government and the churches agreed to the largest class action lawsuit settlement in Canadian history. As part of the settlement, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission begins gathering survivor testimony, so all Canadians can know about this stain on their nation's history.
Mr. Speaker, I stand before you today to offer an apology to former students of Indian residential schools. The government now recognizes that the consequences of the Indian residential schools policy were profoundly negative, and that this policy has had a lasting and damaging impact on Aboriginal culture, heritage, and language.
In the 1960s, the number of residential schools had begun to decline. But Canada's child welfare system continued to intervene in the lives of Aboriginal families, forcibly moving thousands of children into white foster homes. The program became known as the 60s Scoop.
It was this continuation of children being assimilated, children being taken away from their parents.
Social workers, often unfamiliar with Aboriginal culture, are tasked with deciding which children should be removed.
A lot of them had no idea when they came to a reservation of how we lived as Aboriginal people. There was no running water, there was no flushing toilets, there was no electricity, and for them, they consider that poverty.
Bernadette Lahtail was 3 years old when she and her older sister were taken away from her family and put in foster care.
My first foster home was a very crazy home. It was very dysfunctional, lots of violence, lots of abuse. The brother used to molest me. My foster mom actually stabbed me, and she used to strap me with her electrical cord. When I asked my foster mom, "How did I end up here?" She says, "Well, you were just a dirty little Indian. Nobody wanted you, so we took you in." It just tore a piece of me when she said that, because it just felt like I was just thrown away. I grew up feeling that I didn't have a place in this world. I had no idea that I was Cree, had no idea that we were the people of the land. I had no sense of identity at all about who I was.
Today, Bernadette is the executive director of the Creating Hope Society, providing support and resources for survivors of the child welfare system.
When we started talking about the 60 Scoop, I couldn't believe how many people started coming out and saying, "I grew up in child welfare, I grew up in child welfare."
She sees that survivors, denied loving families and schooled in abuse often pass the painful legacy on to their children and grandchildren.
We bring our families together and we talk about how we can stop this cycle of child welfare.
Fewer than 5% of the children in Canada today are Aboriginal, but they represent half of the 30,000 children currently in foster care. 3 generations of Angela Miracle Gladue's family bear the scars of the system. Her grandparents are residential school survivors. Angela and her siblings were all sent to foster homes.
You would hope that social workers would be there to help keep a family together, but instead they broke mine apart.
Angela's mother tried to get her children back, but with no success.
She did a bunch of parenting programs, she got a job, she was volunteering, she was doing really good, but they just, nope, that's not good enough, Mary, now you gotta do this. They didn't see the amazing stuff that my mom was doing. And then my mom eventually gave up.
Angela struggled in the foster care system, but at age 14, she was lucky to finally find a stable home.
My foster mom encouraged me to partake in my culture. I was blessed to live in that foster home, but I know for many First Nations children that's not the case.
As a teenager, Angela started powwow and hip-hop dancing. Today, she performs around the world and works with Aboriginal youth.
I encourage people to be proud of who they are and to seek out their culture and seek out elders and learn about residential schools. Because a lot of kids don't even know, and they just live in this environment that's really toxic, and they don't know why. It can change with them because they're the now, you know? They're not just the future, they're the right now.